right, guys. Welcome back. My name's Tim. I'm here with Misty.
Yes.
And on the line, we have Christian. And this is episode 3 of Hometown Hauntings. And today we're going to be focusing on New Orleans, which is always one of everybody's favorite haunted cities. Mm-hmm. And we really couldn't have a better individual with us today to discuss the hauntings and the history and all that weird shit that goes on in New Orleans than Christian Simmons. Christian, you've been a tour guide for Ghost City for quite a number of years. How did you even get into this mess?
I was working in the streets of the French Quarter already at the time, and I saw some tour guides out here doing the thing. And I always felt like I had an attraction to like the weird and like spooky kind of side of things in the first place. Mm-hmm. I always knew a little bit too much about that kind of thing. And, I've had skills like with public speaking and talking to people before. So I was like, you know what, I'll give that a shot. And I wasn't that huge of like a history buff until I started like looking at hometown, like New Orleans history. Mm-hmm. And then I made me really realize like a lot of wild, like crazy, bizarre shit happened in one very small place in a relatively short amount of time. And so, and this is a city literally built on just chaos and just things coming together. And like one of the nicknames of the city is the accidental city, because just so many chaotic things happen here to create this environment and make it the unique place it is. And ever since then, I got the bug for history, especially like the nitty gritty weird stuff and the spooky stuff. So yeah, it just naturally worked out. And then I hit y'all up and
here we are.
I've been.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely enough of that weird nitty gritty stuff that you're talking about in New Orleans to fill 100 of these podcasts.
Yes.
But what I find most interesting about New Orleans is that it seems like most people in New Orleans have like a surface level knowledge, like, oh yeah, New Orleans is haunted. But very few people will actually take it to the depths that you have and truly understand just how insane the city has been over the past couple hundred years. So the purpose of this podcast, of course, is to try to get people to come out and explore their city, especially focusing on the weird, haunted, all that kind of stuff. So it's one of the first things I want to talk to you about is as a, what would be the word? New Orleanian?
Local?
New Orleanian?
As a local.
How long have you been in New Orleans?
I was born and mostly raised out here. Okay. Actually, on my dad's side, my roots go back in New Orleans to around the 1750s when they all got kicked out of Acadia back in basically French Canada hundreds of years ago. The British took over and imposed the Church of England on everybody. A lot of people didn't want to be part of Church of England, so they got deported. And so my family's been here on my dad's side for almost 3 centuries now. So I was born here, mostly raised here. I've been here my entire adult life, for sure. Okay. So I got the swamp in my blood, literally.
Dun, dun, dun. So for you, when you think of New Orleans, when you think of your hometown, when it comes to this weird, wacky, haunted type activity, what is your overall feel? Like why do you think New Orleans is New Orleans? Why do you think New Orleans is as haunted as it is?
That's a good question. I think it's a lot this was a city that really probably wasn't the best idea to build it in the first place, the way where like ideologically. I always point out like the city was originally kind of like built as a military city, sort of try to defend the mouth of the Mississippi River. That was kind of a huge important part of like, everybody trying to conquer land in the New World. The Mississippi River runs through like 43% of the bodies of water of the United States drain into the Mississippi River. So they built this city specifically like to lock down the Mississippi River as best they could. But that doesn't necessarily mean this was like an ideal place to build a city. I always say like on tours, I point out, they quickly realized maybe they shouldn't have built this city in the middle of this like murky, swampy hellhole, surrounded by water inside of a giant bowl full of these giant man-eating lizards, where floodwaters are going to destroy their homes. New diseases they never heard of killed them quickly and horrifically. The extreme brutal heat every summer made everything that much worse. Like when this city's literally founded, the French thought of this place like a literal hell on earth.
It sounds like an episode of like Survivor.
Just the hubris of being like, we're going to live here no matter what. And the Native Americans even warned the Europeans, don't try to build a city in this cursed, haunted swampland. It won't work out that great. And it's only been 300 years of learning the hard way since then.
It takes us a while to like catch on.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, New Orleans is still here, so they must have done something right. And
it's still here for now.
So why do you think they stayed? And why do you think that New Orleans took such a hold on people that they decided like, hey, we're going to actually turn it into this eventually, accidentally, as you put it, major city. Like, what was it about it?
Originally, it was primarily functionality and military and economic reasons, because they just had to lock this down. Like, there was a huge thing about, like, when the French first settled this area, it was kind of like touch and go for a bit. One of the guys, the founder of New Orleans, the Bienville, it was an incident where, like, there was a British ship coming up the Mississippi River, like they were going to scope out the land and conquer and whatnot. And Iberville, like, bluffed it. He was like, "Hey, you guys, you British folks don't know, but, like, right around the bend here, it's now called the English Turn for this reason. Right around the bend here, we have a massive fleet of French ships ready to wreck y'all if y'all don't turn around and leave right now." There weren't a massive army of French ships waiting for them, but Bienville told them that. And the British were scared by the idea, and they turned around and left, and that allowed us to, lock it down as like a French place originally. Right. And it was strictly just out of necessity. In fact, nobody was willing to live here, which is why originally the first population in New Orleans was mostly French prisoners and French sex workers who were specifically arrested and forced to live here. Because nobody was actually willing to. But after a long time of people being forced to be stuck here, and like their best chance for survival was to stay to the closest semblance of civilization we had around here, eventually people just, found a way to make the best of it. I always say the reason that we party so hard, the reason Mardi Gras is so intense here, is because eventually they were like, you know what? We're all going to die, like, in very horrifying ways pretty quickly out here in these conditions. Like, the life expectancy of the average citizen in New Orleans for, like, the first couple of decades was roughly a year, thanks to natural disasters, fevers, diseases, flooding, very pissed off Native Americans. Like, there wasn't, like, a very intense and long-term plan for living around this area, so people started partying pretty hard. They're like, we're going to die anyway. Let's get lit and party. And it's gotten us through a lot in the last 3 centuries.
Yeah, you got prisoners and sex workers. If that's like the founding population of your city,
they know how to party.
Yeah,
I mean, something's happening. I don't know if it's all.
We are France's Australia, basically. So
that's a good analogy. I've never thought of it that way. Yeah, and they brought the rats too. Maybe the rats were already here.
We brought a lot of things.
Yeah, seriously. So okay, so all that brings us to New Orleans today, and I think. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons a lot of people move here is the culture of New Orleans. Like, a lot of people, at least in my experience, I'm one of them. I visited the city and I was like, well, fuck it. I guess this is where I want to live. And like I said, a lot of it has to do with culture, but I think that, at least this is my opinion, Christian, I'm kind of curious to hear your take on it. And you too, Misty. It seems like New Orleans culture has been shaped by, let's just round it all up and call it the paranormal, more than most, if any other city in the United States. And I've always found that very interesting, that it's like that aspect, the afterlife, connections with your ancestors, voodoo, like all these things really shaped New Orleans into the city it is today. And I don't think a lot of people realize how important all of that was. And without that, New Orleans might not be the city it is today. But I'm kind of curious to hear what you think about that, Christian.
So people often ask me, like, what I feel about, like, the vibe and the spirituality and nature of New Orleans. And there's so the Native Americans that used to call this land their home way back in the day actually referred to this area around here as Bulbancha. That word meant, like, the land of many tongues or many languages, because so many different cultures passed through this area at the time. But the Native Americans weren't settling in this area. It was more of a transient location for them, because they were like, yeah, it's not a good idea to be here, because, like, the spirit of this land, like the spirit of Bulbancha, is known to, like, people, like, I put it this way, the spirit of New Orleans still exists. It's like a thing. It's a real thing to this day. Some even describe it as a sort of vampiric entity that one of two things are usually going to go for you if you come to New Orleans. Like, if you get to this city, a lot of folks feel like a sense of they've come home, or they found their place where they belong, or just like there's a vibe that's just right. It's a welcome vibe. And then other folks get here and they're like, this city is like driving me crazy. I can't get along with it. And then either New Orleans is gonna pull you in with open arms and then hold you, or it's gonna chew you up and spit you out real quick. And the difference is really, like, can you just vibe? Can you, like, chill and enjoy things and just not be strict and just allow the city to just be the city and do what's going on and go with the flow. Because if you're aggressive and fighting back, it'll get spiky out here.
Yeah.
That's like how we get half our stories.
Yeah, seriously.
So.
That's one thing I loved about moving out here. I'm from the West Coast, and it reminds me of like California vibes in areas, like certain areas, like a Venice Beach. It reminds me of Venice Beach because you got open-minded, just go with the flow kind of people, all walks of life, and everybody just mingling to be happy. And that's what I completely get when I'm out there, and I feel like more at peace at home when I'm there. Yeah, there's chaos, and you're like, holy shit at times, where it brings me back to my real hometown, which is Las Vegas, and it's like, whoo, like downtown Fremont. But it has good vibes of people. It just, yeah.
No, New Orleans definitely has a unique vibe. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, actually, both those phases you just talked about, Christian, I've been through both of them. When I first came here, I was like, this is fucking incredible. Like, you know, you can, because I lived right on the edge of the French Quarter on Marigny Street, and I was able to just simply walk out my door and be in the French Quarter and be surrounded by all this energy and just, and you know, it almost felt like New Orleans is like a living beast. Like, and like I felt like a draw to that. But after 2 years, I was like, nah, fuck this. This is too loud. People walking by my window at 3 a.m. screaming. I can't deal with that. But yeah, I've been through both those phases. And so I definitely understand what you're saying. But that vibe, I don't even know how to put it, but it's like below the surface, like that feeling. And some people pick up on it, some people don't, but that vibe is coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether it's man-made, so to say, like, you know, just over the decades and centuries, like New Orleans has just developed this vibe, or it's coming from somewhere else, something deeper.
Oh, I think you definitely feel the history as soon as you start walking down there.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's like whatever this thing is, it's been here for a while. You know, this thing this energy, and that's why I mentioned, you know, New Orleans. It seems like that energy is tied more towards, you know, the hauntings and the ghosts and the supernatural than pretty much any other city I've ever visited before.
I agree.
I mean, do you feel that yourself when you're walking through the French Quarter?
Absolutely. One of our more now very notorious locals from back in the 90s, when Marilyn Manson first was living out here, he eventually described New Orleans as saying, like, when you walk through the streets, I'm paraphrasing, he's like, when you walk through these streets, you feel that sinister energy right under the surface. This city has a sinisterness to it. And it's like, you can feel that. It's just like, it's kind of like the vibe of the city is just kind of like, hey, come on, let's go party, but watch out.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you know, just don't cross the line. And that energy that has been here, that spirit has been in this land far longer than New Orleans has been in this land. But I think I kind of think of it as the spirit of this land versus the city itself is kind of like at odds, because honestly, this city is a monument to the hubris and the arrogance of man. We're not supposed to be able to survive in these conditions, but we're out here getting shit-faced 7 days a week, partying, having clubs going off all the time. It's like we're starting carnival season in a couple days on January 6th. And this year, Mardi Gras is on February 21st. So that means we only get a month and a half of insane partying, ramping up and partying and parading in the streets. It's considered a short season at a month and a half.
So let me ask you a question. Tim mentioned the French Quarter. Is that the place that you notice most the feeling of like history and everything for you is when you're in the French Quarter? Or is there another area that you notice it more?
I mean, there's areas all around the city, like not just the French Quarter. Unfortunately, a lot of folks make the mistake of when they come to New Orleans, they think it's just the French Quarter. Even more unfortunately, some folks think it's just Bourbon Street, and then they just get, they get bourbon faced on shit street, as they say, and then they don't remember being in New Orleans at all. But I would always recommend, there's places all throughout the city that I would recommend, like the Bywater, Marigny neighborhoods have history. The Treme is the oldest established African-American neighborhood in American history. It's the home of Congo Square, which has now been renamed Armstrong Park, but there's amazing history there. It's where the birthplace of the blues, jazz, and rock and roll came from. Haitian enslaved people being forced to practice their culture in that specific spot. Things like that. It's just on the edge of the French Quarter there, but you could go to City Park. There's a spot called the Dueling Oaks. There's only, I think, one of them left because the other one's have tasted the blade of time. But the Dueling Oaks are like a particularly haunted spot right there because that's where they would go out and duel, and sometimes people wouldn't make it, and just like that used to be what Allard Plantation. Apparently, the Voodoo Queen Marie Laveau learned a lot of things from Native Americans in that area around there, and yeah, a lot of people don't think just go to the park. There's history at the park,
Right. No, New Orleans is definitely unique in that aspect. And honestly, when I first came to New Orleans, I was one of those people that's like, oh, New Orleans is the French Quarter. But, I lived in the Marigny, and just the history over there was pretty unique. You start discovering all these things that, you start putting these pieces together. It's like a puzzle almost, you mentioned Marie Laveau, for example. It turned out that I only lived a few blocks from one of the places she used to live in the Marigny, but it was just cool to find out and be able to walk past that building every day and think, that she lived there, what happened here. Like it's an incredible feeling. You brought up music for a second there, Christian, kind of like, all these cultures coming together and creating these unique sounds. I think that same analogy can be used when it comes to, the hauntings and the beliefs systems that people adhere to, and whether you want to consider it religious or not. Like New Orleans was, in a sense, the melting pot for all of these ideas, not just music. What are the cultures, like we talk about, that people coming from Africa, usually against their will, and the Caribbean and places like that. Which one of those groups, or if this question makes any sense, do you think probably had the most influence on the hauntings, ghosts, like that vibe of New Orleans? Like, who do you think brought the most ingredients to this pot, and how so?
I would say a good chunk of the ingredients were already here thanks to the Native Americans, because they had their own spirituality and systems here as well. Like the spirit of Obancha is a Native American term, but out of the cultures that were brought here, many of which, again, by force, I would say the Haitian enslaved people, like when France was in control of Haiti, and there was like an enslaved colony of France. A lot of enslaved people were brought here from Haiti by the French because the French realized that Louisiana was like a perfect place for sugarcane crops. So it was just insane. Like most of the enslaved people were dragged here because of sugarcane plantations in Louisiana. And with them, they brought, like voodoo. I always say is a perfect example of like New Orleans. It is like the New Orleans kind of religion. It is a hodgepodge of all kinds of different things mixed together, originally based on the roots of Haitian hoodoo. Hoodoo is more strict and more like laser focused compared to voodoo. Voodoo is rooted in that, but then it's also got mixed in elements of like Native American spiritual practices, things like, stuff that came from like Central American places like Santeria got kind of blended into it. But also Catholicism is also heavily blended into the voodoo faith as well. In fact, many people consider voodoo to be like an offshoot branch of Catholicism. And Marie Laveau, if anybody ever pressed her, she'd say she was a devout Catholic. And in order to survive their faith, which for when the city for a long time out here was illegal to be anything but Catholic, voodoo practitioners would hide their faith in Catholic symbology because there's a lot of overlap in the structure of voodoo and Catholicism. So like instead of saints, the voodoo faith has Loa. And like, for example, give you an idea. So there's a Loa called Baron Samedi, who's basically like the gatekeeper to the other side. Like he's the one that like when someone passes away, it kind of like guides you to the other side. And in order to, and people will recognize him as like one of the more iconic faces of voodoo in mass media, where like has a skull face, top hat, cigar, rose. Like, yeah, that's the one that is recognized a lot in imagery. But to represent him in Catholic symbology, they use Saint Peter, guardian of the pearly gates, guardian to the afterlife. And even like Marie Laveau is depicted with very Virgin Mary sort of imagery a lot of the time, because in order to, keep their faith going on low key, they just like covered it up in a lot of Catholic symbology so that the predominant culture of the time would not kill and punish them for it. So
I'm Catholic. I swear,
voodoo is a great example of like all these things mixing together.
So at the end of the day, you know, because I know this question is going to come up with people who are listening to this because there's so many misconceptions. Let's just be blunt. Are there people chopping off heads of chickens, drinking their blood in the French Quarter, doing voodoo rituals?
Well, there are definitely people doing voodoo rituals, whether they're chopping up chicken heads and stuff like that. I would say different people have different interpretations of different faiths and stuff.
Right.
Like, I don't know. It's kind of like, voodoo's a lot like jazz where like people have different approaches to it. I would say that I wouldn't put myself as an authority on the voodoo faith
Sure.
because it's like it's that I would not put that much weight on my own shoulders. I dabble in occultism and stuff like that, but I wouldn't want to put myself in trouble by saying I'm like the voodoo guy.
Right.
I just know a thing or two about a thing or two, but different people have their different approaches. There's blood rituals and stuff like that people do out here. There's the vampire community out here that's dabbling their own
hearing more
blood
and more
games
about
and
this vampire community. Which,
oh yeah, I know a good bit about a thing or two. So,
well,
a thing or two about a thing or two.
Well, when people move here, because when people come here, unfortunately, like you mentioned earlier, Christian, they're more interested in going to Bourbon Street and getting shit faced and
Whoop, whoop.
flashing boobies or whatever the average tourist thinks happens in New Orleans year round.
This is season.
Yeah. But the people who are moving here, should they expect to see any of this? Like, because voodoo, it's not like in your face in the street, is it? Or the vampire community or any of these things. It's kind of like below the surface. Like, so if I move here,
I think if you're looking for it, if you're looking for something, you'll find it. But you have to engage yourself in the culture and be like, they have to accept you.
I mean, is that how it is?
Well,
not any walk of life. If you're like, I'm looking for this, they're going to look at you and be like, sure you are. But I think if you had some underlying knowledge, then and within time, they might accept you into what you're looking.
Because I imagine there's a lot of people who live in New Orleans right now who I've heard about this, the voodoo community or a vampire community. And I don't want you to say anything compromising or anything that you feel uncomfortable with, but for these people that are now locals and they're interested in voodoo, if they're interested in any of this stuff, like how do they even begin their journey into exploring that side of New Orleans?
Well, I would say that if you were at all interested in seeking it out, it's not hard to find traces of it. Like you will see voodoo culture and the vampire stuff like peeking out every now and then, and just your day-to-day stroll through the French Quarter or through the neighboring areas. But a lot of it is kind of like more underground, like, especially because some communities don't want just to be a spectacle. It's not like, it's not a show. It's not entertainment. It's people's actual lives and lifestyles and faiths and beliefs. So it's not a toy. It's not a game. It's not, voodoo is not what you see in the movies or American Horror Story, stuff like that necessarily. But when people seek out, I would always recommend go to the voodoo temple, learn about it, like the voodoo museum, go to places like Voodoo Authentica. If you want to actually see authentic voodoo stuff, that's out there, and people think that it's like a dead religion or it was just, no, it's very, very much alive and thriving. It's actually gaining speed. More and more people are getting into alternative faiths out there these days, and voodoo's among them. And as far as the vampire stuff, the vampire community, some are like, yeah, check it out, we're vampire people. Others are just like, you
think it's because of the
about
TV
their own
shows?
business, about their own community, and
like the shows that brought it out here to New Orleans, like the originals. Not that I watched the originals, but I'm just saying.
No. Between the originals and the Interview with the Vampire, I mean, really, we can blame Anne Rice for a lot of the vampire tourism we get out here, and which I'm thankful for. I don't knock it. There's still a lot of vampire history in New Orleans, and there's a lot of vampire present at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, and so this is the part where I'm going to sound like I'm going to try to not sound like an asshole.
Okay.
So when I think because I've had a couple people actually, a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, we had some people come down and meet with you, Christian. One of the ideas they brought back was, that I guess you had brought up the idea of the vampire community. I don't know how much you guys went into it, and they were wanting me to start vampire tours, and I was like, well, vampires aren't real, like, because that's but you might have something different to say, and that's kind of what I'm interested in. So I am of the vampires aren't real. There's certainly not human beings drinking human blood in the French Quarter or New Orleans or any of that kind of stuff. So once again, I don't want to put you in a weird position. Feel free to pass up any question you want to pass up. But like, are vampires, as in at least 50% of what we see in the movies, is that actually happening?
So now people asking me that about vampires and ghosts and supernatural, inhuman things in general. I always try to be fair and honest and be like, I will always admit I am skeptical. I am not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious, and when I looked into it and I found out about vampires, now, are there immortal beings walking around that have been around for hundreds of years? Maybe. I don't know. I one time somebody made a very good point to me that they claim to be an expert in this kind of thing, and they seem to know a thing or two about a thing or two as well. They were like, an actual vampire would never, ever, ever be caught undead telling you that they're an actual vampire, because actual vampires don't want to get killed by people who get freaked out by actual vampires. So if you met somebody saying that they're an actual vampire, they probably are not. But I will say that it depends on your definition of vampire, though. Because a lot of the supernatural stuff is like, stuff of myth and legend and stuff like that. Whereas there is a real vampire community and lifestyle. I always, sometimes on my tours when I bring up vampire stuff, I'll point out, people think I'm kidding when I say there's a thriving vampire community here that's always on the lookout for new blood, but I mean that literally. They throw interesting parties around. I don't know if they still call it that. Every Halloween they hosted the Bloodlust Ball of New Orleans inside this like abandoned like old Catholic church in the quarter. I've been to that party a few times over the years. But they're diverse people. You get your vampire kids, goth kids, even like sparkly Twilight inspired style vampire folks getting into it. But you do have actually a lot of honest to God human blood drinkers too. Like that's actually a thing.
Like bizarre to me. I mean, aside from the safety issues, like I don't want your hepatitis.
I'm with you.
Which you make a good point.
It just always intrigued me that there are people that live this way, and by all means, like I don't want anybody in this community come beating down my door or hating me, because I am not insulting, I'm not degrading. I'm simply
just not for you.
I'm coming from a place like I don't understand.
Yeah.
Like, so it's not meant in a disrespectful manner, because for me, when I think vampires, I think of Nandor the Relentless from, what we do in the shadows, and
I've met people like that.
And people thinking that they're that, but I also understand that that's TV and that's ridiculous, You're using creepy paper, none of that.
No, it's a beloved show, especially around circles out here. I will say that, a lot of it is like, I can't confirm or deny the authentic supernatural aspect of people's vampirism. I know that vampirism itself is like considered like technically there's a medical condition that people believe is what inspired the mythology and lore of vampirism. People who have iron deficiencies, who I believe it's called sanguinism, which is like Latin for blood drinker or something like drunk. Basically the idea is or it's blood related, whatever sanguinism refers to, but it's specifically like a blood disorder where it can cause people to be pale and avoid sunlight, and have an iron deficiency that can cause people to like some people say the only way they can get proper nutrients that they need to stabilize their medical condition is through consuming another person's blood that is compatible for what they need. And you made a great point that there's safety issues with that. Now, I will say several years ago, some of the local bloodsuckers, not going to name any names or anything, some folks kind of got in some trouble because several years ago, so there's a lot of people out there who do enjoy, sinking their fangs into another person's flesh to suck blood straight out of them, and always consensually, we hope, because there's a lot of folks in New Orleans who do actually enjoy getting bitten by vampires. I'm glad they found the community here, but
that's a hell of a community.
It does cause a problem, though. When it started becoming a problem when diseases started getting spread around
Yeah.
by accident. So actually, I believe it was the year 2015 when the state of Louisiana passed new state laws concerning the safe consumption of human blood. And now there is a more standardized and
Guidelines.
sterilized method of blood consumption that's supposed to be more safe. And,
Okay.
you know, it's, if you ever watched a show on Netflix called Dark Tourism, there's actually some
yeah.
of my buddies are featured in one of the episodes where they talk about the vampire community in New Orleans.
Okay.
And they did a demonstration, like the way that they are supposed to safely drink blood is like the person who is offering to have their blood drunk.
Right.
It's a razor blade, a sterilized razor blade, is supposed to be taken to make an incision in a safe place, usually the back, like in the back shoulder area, and then blood would be coaxed out of the wound into a sterile cup, and then the drinker would drink from the cup instead of like putting their mouth on somebody's flesh, because that's supposed to be the safe way to do it, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a thing.
Count me out.
Well, count me out. But you know what? To each their own. And if the community's thinking of ways to make people safe doing what they enjoy doing, I'm all about live your life.
Maybe that's where COVID came from.
Maybe, who knows? But you know, life is short. Live it to your fullest, but just be safe.
It wasn't
doing
Wuhan.
it.
That was all cover up.
You know, about a month ago, I had to help a friend of mine who was having a fentanyl overdose in a club down here, and I had to Narcan her 3 times. And I was like, that made me really realize how important it is to point out, like, when you're out of the clubs, you don't want to take drugs that you haven't tested, you're not sure about. And in some clubs, you got to test your drugs, but in some clubs in New Orleans, you got to test the blood, I guess.
Right.
And different strokes, different folks.
Exactly.
So, honestly, I don't even know where to whoa. Where do we?
I think
where
that's
do we go
great.
From there?
I do think that's great. But we'll get back to you being a tour guide. No, by all means. But let's get back to you being a tour guide. I want to know, on your tours, when guests talk to you and you're doing, going to different areas, what is the most strangest, I'd say, paranormal thing that happened during a tour? If you have any stories like that.
There's 2 spots in particular where I see the most like weird stuff that people would consider paranormal activity. That would be, of course, Lola Ree Mansion and also Marie Laveau's former residence. That's just off the edge of on the edge of the French Quarter, just off of
the Armstrong Park.
Armstrong Park. Now around Lola Ree, it tends to be less fortunate type of things. Around Laveau, it tends to be more justice based. It seems like. For example, I always point out, like, you do not want to be like Marie Laveau was known to be a woman you didn't want to piss off. To this day, that legacy remains. If people disrespect Laveau or piss her off, she might show up in a big way, showing she's not too pleased. I've had times where people try to troll my tour group or try to insult Marie Laveau or something while I'm doing the tour, and then bad things happen pretty instantly. One of my favorite stories was one time this I always point out, like, in the French Quarter, you got to watch out for driving out here, because, like, you got to look both ways when you cross the streets of the French Quarter, because all the streets have one-way signs in the quarter, but a lot of the drivers are way too drunk to read the street signs. So you got to keep an eye out. So one time there was this guy just hauling ass down St. Anne Street where Laveau's house is. I'm almost done with the tour. He's hauling ass down the street doing like 50, 60 miles an hour really fast, which is like insane. And your car won't survive very long with the potholes in New Orleans if you do that. But he's zooming by, and one of the women in my audience yelled out at him to slow down. Like, that was just all she said, just like, hey, slow down, or something like that. And this guy decides to yell back at her with a word that starts with a C, ends with an unt.
Tuesday,
and before that guy, and he said this right in front of Laveau's house. And he didn't make it to the end of the block. He didn't get to the stop sign before his engine in his car just blew up. Like, his car just suddenly just dies before he made it to the end of the street. And that guy was out there literally for hours trying to get somebody to come pick his car up, like trying to get a tow. And it was just like, you could call that a coincidence, but I've seen that kind of thing happen like 4 or 5 times in just that one spot. One time a guy whipped around the corner driving down the street, and his car suddenly just stops right in front of Laveau's house while I'm like wrapping up my tour. So like his car is right between me and Laveau's house across the street. And he's gutting it. He's hitting pedal to the metal, and the car's not budging an inch, but his engine is trying and he's not moving. And eventually, and pretty quickly from the edge of the street, we hear, "Stop that guy! Stop him! Oh my God, stop him!" And it turns out that as he was whipping around the corner, he hit a woman on a bicycle and knocked her to the ground and ran over her hand.
Oh, wow.
And when he gets out of the car, he's shirtless, he's wearing pajama pants, and he's clearly drunk out of his mind. And he's like, "What? Did I hit something? What's the deal? What's going on?" And everybody's like, "Yeah, you just ran over a woman on a bicycle." And I even told him, "Do not try to get back in your car. Don't try to ride away. That's about to turn this DUI into a hit and run, and that's an extra felony charge. You don't want that." He got back in his car and then eventually started making his way, but everyone took his photo of his face, his car, everything. And that guy is in jail. And I think Lavelle might have helped out.
I feel like there's a hit and run like every other day.
Oh.
In the French Quarter.
Every other hour.
Yeah,
like, this place.
Like I almost got hit a couple times. And I'm usually sober. Anyways, be careful.
Yeah. And like Christian said, the potholes are something fierce. So if you drive a car that's slow to the ground, watch out for that.
You know, it's funny. All these things that we're talking about, it kind of goes back to the idea of New Orleans being like this chaotic energy, almost like it can't even be controlled. You know, there's just something about it here. But there's also a feeling of neglect. That's another feeling that I get here a lot too. You know, we're talking about potholes in the city. I mean, we've all walked around the French Quarter and just see how dilapidated, you know, some of these areas are that are major tourist areas. You know, so what's going on in New Orleans, like today, like, you know, for the people that live here and they, you know, New Orleans as a whole, it's not just the French Quarter, it's pretty infamous for the potholes. I mean, they have the pothole parties and the, you know, I saw a picture of
potholes.
Yeah. Have you heard of these? Have you heard of them, Christian? No. The pothole parties where they like.
Yeah. No, people celebrate the potholes sometimes. Just the how hilariously ridiculous they are.
Oh yeah, they have like grills and like.
You think it's because of the weather and the rain and everything that just causes when they repave them to go back to just being crappy, or just the forces of nature that makes them
crap politicians that the money never actually gets to the
where
people.
They need to go. Well, maybe.
At least in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Allow me to rant on that for like a second.
Yeah.
Part of it. I mean, weather conditions are a thing. I mean, you know what? I tell tourists to watch their step. I know people love looking up in this city all the time. I can't blame them because it's gorgeous out here. Ironwork railings, cathedrals, and everything. But you got to look down very often too. People come out here; they're shocked to see how busted up the sidewalks and streets are. But I always point out, you're looking at what happens when you build a city on top of a swamp that's like generally about 6 feet above water on a Gulf that gets hit by hurricanes every single year. Well, we're currently the city is sinking roughly 2 inches every year at this time. So the streets are moving around a lot. There's potholes in the French Quarter. You look down, it goes 6 feet down. And it's very dangerous sometimes. And part of that is, storms and erosion, the ground being so unsteady because it's literally swampland. It's not really ground under the city. So that's constantly causing problems. You can't build a basement out here because they'll flood instantly. There's no real stability under the streets. So that's part of it. But also, when you say neglect, well, one of the city's oldest nicknames, which it's kind of like, I said this to old locals and they're like, you know too much about like old New Orleans, because it's kind of like they don't use this nickname as much anymore. New Orleans is often called the city that care forgot. Which I point out sounds nice at first. Sounds carefree. It sounds like, you can go to New Orleans and let your cares just melt away and party and have fun and not worry. But then,
no, I don't feel that at all when you say that.
When you don't care, that's when things fall apart.
Right. Yeah.
So everybody's too busy not caring and enjoying what they can, and then buildings are falling apart and collapsing into the streets. And one of the biggest points I'll make to tie some of all these things that we just talked about together, a defining moment that I think points out exactly about the spirit of Bobancha, the spirit of New Orleans, and the dark sense of humor, irony, and justice that this spirit of New Orleans has. It knows how to punish the people of this city for their sins, you know? So y'all, I don't know how much, what exactly I can say about this incident because it's so recent and it's such a debacle. Y'all remember the Hard Rock Hotel incident? 2019, they were building the Hard Rock Hotel on Canal Street, or just off Canal Street. And it collapsed in October in 2019 in the middle of construction because apparently, from what we were told, they weren't following safety code regulations to make sure that the structure was built with the columns close enough together or whatever. They were trying to install a rooftop pool, and it collapsed into the street, and it caused the entire, like, half the hotel in mid-construction to collapse into the street, and it killed 3 of the workers involved. And that was because of allegedly cutting corners and trying to save costs by, saving on construction materials by building the columns too far apart and stuff like that, and rushing the gig and whatnot. And apparently there was some tie-in with the local government and stuff like that. Whatever. It's been years. So I don't remember all the nitty gritty, and I don't want to get sued on anything that I say wrong.
Yeah, I'm trying not to lose a business license.
Well, edit out if you need anything. You can beep me, just muzzle me. But no, but long story short, this hotel collapsed in the middle of construction because some corners being cut, and 3 people died in the process. One of the workers, 2 of the bodies were not recovered from the hotel immediately. 2 of them were left just in the hotel to rot, and we found out about one of them about a month later. A tarp blows off the wreckage, revealing the legs of this person still wearing their work jeans and boots, just sticking out of the wreckage. And one of the biggest things I achieved in social media was I made a post that says something like, "Hey, just shout out to the 1.5 million tourists expected to visit us this Mardi Gras season. I just want to let you know the city officials have kindly asked us to stop looking up and taking photos of the human corpse dangling over the busiest street in New Orleans during the busiest party of the year. So just heads up."
Oh my gosh.
And because and that body was left dangling there for almost a full year, for I think 11 months.
It was almost a year. Yeah, I remember that very vividly. Because in my head, I was thinking, because I heard all the stories about the corners being cut and all that stuff too. And in my head, as somebody who's not a fan of government anyways, I'm thinking these fucking idiots, are you seriously suggesting there's nothing you can do to get this guy,
to get them down?
Like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
That's just the stupidest
There's
shit.
got to be a way.
And it infuriated a lot of people. But no, I mean, you're right, Christian. It's almost like New Orleans has like this, just look the other way. Just
let me cover you up with the tarp and a year. Jeez.
They covered it up for a month, but the tarp blew off because I guess they didn't tie it down hard enough, and then the body was just visible from the street. Now, my point with that, the story is the next, that was October 2019. So just a few months before 2020. And of course, we kick off every year on January 6th. We kick off the carnival season, which is why I made that post like, hey, I know about 1.5 million of y'all coming. Don't look up at the corpse. We don't want y'all taking photos and stuff. Well, I think the spirit of New Orleans, Bulbancho, whatever you want to call it, I think this try to teach us a lesson, because that was considered Mardi Gras 2020 was considered the worst, most cursed Mardi Gras the city's ever seen. 2 people were killed by parade floats that year, which had never happened before. Last time anybody was killed by a parade float was back in the 80s. But one day, a woman, a little old lady, she was trying to cross between 2 floats that are connected together. Sometimes they have 2 or 3 floats connected together, tandem floats. She tripped over the buckle. She was trying to get to her granddaughter or something on the other side of the parade. She tripped over the buckle, and one of the floats ran over her and split her in half. Jesus. And she died. Wow. And so then the city was like, okay, for safety reasons, no more floats connected together. Every float's separate. Then a few days later, a man slipped on a bag of beads that was laying on the ground. He slipped and went under another parade float, and he got crushed to death. And multiple people fell off of balconies that year, more than had happened before. And then on top of all this, Mardi Gras 2020 ended up becoming the first major super spreader event of the COVID pandemic in the United States.
Right.
And so some people believe that Mardi Gras was the most cursed Mardi Gras in history, because the spirit of New Orleans was like, y'all are really going to just let this poor undocumented worker's corpse dangle on the street above everybody while they're partying, and there's just a rotting corpse up there. There's that person has a family who knows their body's rotting there,
and then they have to go on social media and see a picture of their son,
loved
husband,
ones,
father, whatever. Yeah, it was total bullshit.
I'd be livid.
The city of New Orleans should be embarrassed forever.
Shame
about letting that happen.
We learned something from that, I'd hope.
I don't know about that. We'll just wait till the next hotel collapses and we'll find out. Probably on its way.
We're just going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
I'm Matthew.
And I'm Quentin.
And this is Visceral Reactions, your regular stop for irregular amounts of horror. Join us as we analyze horror movies and explore their historical contexts. From classic scares to hidden gems, hear in-depth discussions and new perspectives on the genre. Tune in every week to expand your horror horizons on Visceral Reactions, the podcast.
You know, the point that you're making with that story kind of goes back to my original point too. It's almost like New Orleans is, I think I called it like a beast or something. Like it's almost like it's its own entity, and whether it is like a singular spiritual energy or if it's just a collection of energy, there's definitely something going on in New Orleans that I have not felt. And I've been in a lot of cities. I have never felt that in any other city. And it's so, even as I'm sitting here, I feel like I'm stumbling over words, trying to find the right question or the right word or whatever to bring that feeling out into this interview. But there's just something, and you have to be
If you haven't experienced, you definitely want to.
And I think that is why a lot of people move here.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
They're like, I kind of, I like they become addicted to that.
I could see that.
You know?
Yes.
Yeah. There's a local term for that. It's called drinking the water.
I thought he was
If you
gonna say
drink the water, you'll become one of us.
Right.
Okay.
Fair warning, you know?
Yeah.
And maybe there is something in the water. I always say, like, I don't know why we always pop up in all the darkest chapters of American history, but I think it's something in the water, which, by the way, if you visit New Orleans, try not to drink the tap water. I'm serious. A lot of our major plumbing is like incredibly old. We get boil water advisories kind of frequently. So just don't drink the tap water.
Don't drink the water.
I think the only city with worse tap water than New Orleans is St. Augustine. You ever been to St. Augustine? Their water tastes like ass. I don't know.
Nope.
It's horrible.
Some people won't be into that.
Yeah, maybe.
Yes. I'm okay.
So let's start exploring New Orleans just a little bit more. So let's say I am somebody who moved to New Orleans, and maybe or maybe it's somebody who's coming to town from Mardi Gras, but they don't want to make their entire time here about Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
Or I moved here and I want to learn more about the history of the city.
Yeah.
And like how do we get these people out exploring the city more? And I know, being a ghost tour company, that is one way to do it, but I'm not even talking about that. The way I've always worded, like when people ask me, why I got into ghost tours, it wasn't for ghosts at all. Like I didn't start this company because I love ghosts. I actually love history.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, of course there are exceptions, but the vast majority of the public doesn't seem to give two shits about history. So?
I think most people that have a ghost interest, paranormal interest, the history goes back to that.
But I just mean the entire population as a whole. Most people are incredibly stupid. When it comes to history, and unfortunately, I found that you almost needed a catalyst to get them interested in the history. And for me, it was the ghosts. I was like, okay, well, if we can pull people in with the ghosts and the hauntings, and like that's the hook that reels them in. Then below the surface, we're able to, shove all this history down their throat. Yeah. Which is way more important to me than the ghost stuff ever could be.
Well, because that's one of the things, though, with Ghost City Tours, it's factual. Like, it's history-based.
Yeah, we're not talking about zombies eating babies in graveyards and all that shit. But so if they are coming to Mardi Gras and they're looking for they want to know the real New Orleans. Hey, I just moved here and I'm interested in learning more about the history of the city. But like I said, maybe we have to pull them in with the ghosts and the hauntings and all that stuff. Like what would you suggest?
Spoonful of sugar.
Yeah, exactly.
Spoonful of sugar.
So what would you suggest those people? Like, hey, I just moved here. I know New Orleans is known for this incredible history, whether it's in the French Quarter or the Garden District, which, by the way, we haven't even brought up the Garden District at all. Like, that's an incredible neighborhood. But now I live there. Like, what are some of the things that I can do? Or where are some of the places that I can visit that might not be the Lottery Mansion or
place where more locals know?
Yeah, like what are these like kind of underground haunted places or underground locations that just have bizarre history associated with them that I might want to check out?
I always, tell, tourists on the tours that, like, I always appreciate when people make a spooky haunted tour, like one of the first things they do when they get to town, because it's one of the quickest ways to, like, not only learn your way around the area, but also to know why the city ended up the way it is. Because what do they say? Like most of history is like war. No, it's just like a lot of history is like messed up stuff happening. Yeah. Now, the nice things that happen in New Orleans, I mean, honestly, I wish there was more space to talk about like the nice things that happen in New Orleans, because a lot of the nice things that happen here is because we had to do something to make up for all the other stuff happening here. Yeah. But well, for example, I'm wearing the Museum of Death shirt right now, and it's the New Orleans one. It says where the big easy meets the big sleep. Now, It's a little bit of a shameless plug.
That's
My
all
girlfriend actually works there, but the Museum of Death is a fascinating place to like just learn about like stuff like that. But as far as locally going, a lot of people don't know that Lee Harvey Oswald grew up in New Orleans.
Oh, okay.
Like I bring that up on tours. The guy who allegedly assassinated President John F. Kennedy grew up here.
I didn't know that.
And the guy that put a bullet in Oswald's stomach and killed him 2 days after the assassination, which wasn't suspicious at all. That was a guy named Jack Ruby. He was an owner of a strip club in New Orleans at the time. We got a few connections to the Kennedy assassination around town.
It's really funny. I literally just brought that up. I think it was last night to my girlfriend because she was watching this show. I think it's on Hulu, and I can't remember what it's called. It's like 11, whatever the date Kennedy was assassinated.
Oh, I watched that.
23,
11/6,
yes.
63 or whatever, and it has like James Franco, and she's really into this. So, if my research is correct, our first office in New Orleans was on Magazine Street. I think it was 643 Magazine Street. And there used to be a department store literally right across the street from that office. And Lee Harvey Oswald, at least from what I've read, worked in that department store for a period of time.
Okay.
So I literally, it's so cool that you brought that up because and my girlfriend's looking at me like, really? I'm like, no, I swear it's like true, I think. Yeah.
That's true. It is.
But, yeah,
I love history. I had no idea that Lee Harvey Oswald was from New Orleans.
Yeah. Well, see, this is the point of this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Like to get
learn
people
something
out
new.
And, like, these cities are so much more fascinating than like even I realized.
Yeah.
I learned new stuff all the time, for better or worse. So,
that's so cool.
So we got something for the blood drinkers. We got something for the JFK conspiracy fans, enthusiasts, whatever you want to call them. What are some other cool, wacky areas in New Orleans that we should check out?
I definitely recommend looking into, like, for example, like the history of Mardi Gras cultures. We're about to hit Mardi Gras right now. Like the season of Mardi Gras is coming up. I got the Mardi Gras tree ready and everything.
I see that. I love it.
Yeah, that's my Mardi Gras tree. It's,
here, aren't we?
Or something. I'm all about it. I just did my Mardi Gras snoop on the stoop.
Oh yeah, that's true. All right, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, Christian. So
about to be king cake season. There's the whole history of king cake. There's a whole history of why we do the parades. There's a whole history of like how it developed from then and there to here and now. One of the things that I think is fascinating is like the different cultures and the different groups that got involved in Mardi Gras. Like I don't know how much you know about the Zulu crew of Zulu, which for those who don't know, a crew is basically like a social club who focuses on Mardi Gras and developing their own parades and styles and throws from the parades and stuff like that. And they have social clubs that also their community outreach things a lot of time. And the Zulu group for me is fascinating for their history because they originally started off as like the first Black people's Mardi Gras group. Right. Because at that time when it first started, I hate to say that notoriously the original founding crews, a lot of them were notoriously whites only and racist and stuff like that. I can even touch on that in a moment, but the crew of Zulu, somebody's doing something weird just outside my house, so it's New Orleans. But
I was like, oh shit, a ghost in Christian's
house. That's what I was thinking.
So Zulu, the crew of Zulu, they originally were kind of like, now I hope I don't misspeak on any of this because like, it's not a crew I'm part of, but it was like the Black parade, the Black Mardi Gras crew. And their whole imagery is based on blackface, like parodying racism, parodying racist stereotypes. The one of the symbols of the Zulu parade is like I hope I'm not saying this wrong. It's like the boss man, like basically like a parody of like a caricature, a racist minstrel show caricature of Black people, and they take that imagery and exaggerate it even further. Like the blackface exaggerations are even more extreme, and it's meant to be like a fuck you. We're gonna take your racist bullshit and make fun of you for how racist and crazy you are by exaggerating it. And that whole culture that developed there is fascinating. But then it gets even weirder. So in the 90s, a new city law was passed that you were not allowed to roll a parade unless it was non-discriminatory. Like anybody of any race can join your parade and whatever, no restrictions. Like if you're a whites only crew, you can't have a parade rolling the streets because that's messed up. Right. Unfortunately, some crews actually decided to retire rather than allow non-white people to join their crews, and I could touch on that or I could not. Depends
I don't
on
care.
things, but the Crew of Zulu is one of the first ones to actually be like, all right, fine. Yeah, no, we have no problem with that. We love everybody.
Yeah.
We love Mardi Gras. It's interesting when you see white people on the parades wearing blackface characters like that. There's a whole controversy about
I think
that.
Justin
It's
Trudeau
weird.
was
It's a unique
wanted to
dynamic.
join.
Huh?
Oh, I said, is that the one Justin Trudeau wanted
actor?
to join? No,
Ugh.
we're gonna leave that one another
Okay.
time.
Yeah.
But
No,
yeah,
I don't know if that's something to touch on. It's just like that's just a fascinating, weird thing that it's something I could feel like it only happened in New Orleans, like a parade party thing that has that
right.
weird sort of how did this happen?
Oh, I mean, none of that's surprising. I mean, from the law to the racist groups. I mean, because I mean, there's still plenty of them around. You know,
yeah, you're telling me.
so none of that's terribly surprising, but
No.
But it's hard to imagine any of this happening in any other city in the United States. You know what I mean? Like it just adds to the, like we're not going to go to like Pittsburgh and they're going to be like, oh, hey, the traditionally black crew has to let white people in and now they're going to paint their faces black. Like that doesn't happen.
It wouldn't happen
like,
in Vegas.
You know, like Arlington, Virginia. That's not a thing.
No.
Only in New Orleans.
Yeah.
It really is. And like it's just there's that whole culture. There's a group called the Mardi Gras Indians, which are a very gorgeous, flamboyantly dressed group. They are basically wearing like exaggerated costume versions of like Native American style. And there's a very interesting history there because like you can talk about people are worried about like cultural appropriation and stuff like that. Now, the Mardi Gras Indians basically is a group of like black ancestry, of African ancestry. It was basically from like the enslaved peoples that were like the Seminole, for example, folks who were seeking help and like became part of Native American tribes, and they came together. Now I'm hoping I don't mess any of the details up on this, but basically the Mardi Gras Indians was like sort of adopted into like as an honorary sort of part of the culture. Even though they weren't Native Americans, it was an embrace. It was like a sort of we're coming together to aid each other and be a community. And it's a proud tradition. I know people who are part of the families who've been doing this for centuries, I think. And there's a beautiful history there. One of my favorite things that if you're in New Orleans and you want to get Mardi Gras and spooky all together, one of the best things I've ever seen at Mardi Gras is this group called the Skull and Bones Gang.
Oh, yeah.
They are the very first parade on Mardi Gras Day. They start at literally the crack of dawn, like 6 o'clock in the morning. They go walking through the Treme, the oldest established African-American neighborhood in the history of the United States and in America. They all dress up as bones. They have like bones and giant skulls, and they walk around, and their thing is they wake up at the very crack of dawn on Mardi Gras Day and they bang on people's doors throughout the neighborhood. And that's the dead waking everybody up to realize the fact is we are all going to die. Might as well live as hard as you can until that happens. Wake up, because it's coming. So you better get your Mardi Gras on.
Yeah, the Skull and Bones. I mean, that's terribly interesting. And if you guys don't know what we're talking about, just Google that because the imagery that's associated with these individuals is pretty fascinating and interesting. I think it was my second or third year in New Orleans. I purposely walked over into the Treme to try to witness this, and somehow I missed everything. I was like,
a day late,
like they're on 3 streets over or some shit.
Wow.
But no, it's definitely incredibly interesting. Why do you think the dead matters so much? Like here in New Orleans specifically, like you just said, they're going around imitating. I don't know if it's the right word, or representing the dead.
Representing, yeah. I would say representing, yeah. They're out there to let you know, like everybody who ever lived in New Orleans, they died, so watch out. Everybody who's ever lived here, they died at some point. Now, we only are here today because of our ancestors before us and what they learned to do, what not to do. And if you don't listen, then you're gonna make the same mistakes that the ones who didn't listen and didn't stick around because of it. That's the whole thing. Like, the only reason this city has managed to survive is because of the ones who learned the lessons. The ones who know to batten down the hatches when the storm comes. But the ones who know how to roll with the punches here. And we wouldn't. I mean, I don't think humanity would be able to survive without learning lessons from our ancestors. And in New Orleans, it's vital to the culture to pay respect to like the ones who went through all that in the back in the day and brought us to where we are now. And they managed to survive long enough to make sure that we can survive, and so on and so forth. And a lot of people draw a lot of power from their ancestors here.
Yeah. Well,
roots go deep.
I totally agree with you, but I think that people not listening is also a big part of New Orleans too. Like that are like, oh yeah, we'll just try that again.
Yeah.
I always joke. I have a lot of job security, making my living talking about people dying here.
You're never gonna run out of material.
No, every other day it's a new story.
Well, the skull and bones thing. I mean, there's another aspect of New Orleans, and I actually did get to witness one of these that kind of brings death to the surface. It's death is very much in your face, and that was the jazz funeral.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And once again, I'm not saying that they don't happen anywhere else, but they don't happen anywhere else that I'm aware of.
I've never seen that before.
That's definitely another aspect of New Orleans being New Orleans, I would think, Christian. This idea that, is it that they're embracing death? Is it that like New Orleans as a culture, like, I mean, obviously it brings some comfort, right? Like why does New Orleans go out of its way to push or put death right in front of your face like they do?
Well, it's a big sort of, let the good times roll and enjoy it while it lasts has kind of been like the underlying like motto of this city for a lot of reasons. I mean, hell, they say by 2050, the water levels will rise up enough to where it's going to overwhelm the city. So I always say, enjoy the city while it lasts. We've made it 3 centuries. I don't know. We got another 3 decades. I'm sure the hurricanes will do something to us before then, but it's always been a vibe of like, just enjoy it the most while you can, because, like I said, when the city was first founded, the life expectancy for most people was 1 year on average. Right. And being surrounded by that much death all the time, when it's right in your face, when literally, when Europe was just sending people over here by the thousands just to watch half of them die within a year or two, just to try to establish some sort of foundation here. At some point, there's no avoiding death, but in this city particularly, death became part of the culture. Part of the voodoo faith that scares so many people is because it's so embracing of the afterlife and death, and it's an important part of the aspect of recognizing, we ain't immortal,
right?
We will eventually hit that day, but until then, enjoy it while it lasts. And the jazz funeral is a perfect example of that. It started off at I'll say the second line as parades. It's basically a little mini parade, and this tradition started off way back when it was what happened when a beloved jazz musician would pass away. It would always be a very sad, solemn, somber sort of funeral march to the edge of town, to the cemetery on the edge of the city, where they would lay them to rest. But then their march back into the city is a big, explosive, vibrant, colorful, just explosion of a celebration of life. Because that's the thing. We know we're all going to go eventually. So while we are here, while we're now, we got to just enjoy it as much as possible. And this city thrives on that,
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. But you also bring up another interesting aspect of New Orleans that a lot of people visiting town are interested in. And honestly, the cemeteries. The cemeteries were a huge draw for me in New Orleans. There were plenty of weekends where, I would be able to walk up to the St. Roch Cemetery, for example, and just spend. I mean, it's not a huge cemetery. I don't know if you've ever been to St. Roch. You probably have, Christian, but it's not a huge cemetery. And to be able to spend an entire day there, I mean, it's a little bit of work, but there's just something about it. Then, of course, we have the St. Louis cemeteries, and then you go up to the Metairie Cemetery, which I got locked in one time. Me and my 2 kids, we got locked in there one day, which was because they're like, "Oh, Dad, they're closing the gates." I'm like, "We'll be fine," and we eventually did get out. Somebody let us out, but
that was good.
But I was like, "Fuck!" I got us locked into this cemetery at night.
It's funny you said that. It's funny you bring up being locked in Metairie Cemetery. Yeah, I didn't get locked in there, but I don't really people ask me if I ever do the cemetery tours. I always say, I don't, those happen during the day. I don't wake up early enough to be out doing tours during the day. No, but yeah, I don't really do the cemetery tours particularly much. But I have hung out in the cemeteries around here, have some fun, have a drink. I will say a friend of a friend, some friends would hang out in Meadows Cemetery late at night because they know a hole in the fence. But there's definitely a culture going on there too. And the cemeteries out here are fascinating. There's traditions at some of these cemeteries, like, you know, particularly famous people's graves. Like, for example, Josie Arlington has her grave in Metairie Cemetery. Josie Arlington was like this madam who was running like a chain of the brothels back in the day in old New Orleans, and she became like the boss. Like, she was like considered one of the most badass women the city's ever seen. Her grave is out there now. Unfortunately, some folks pay respects to her grave in very interesting ways.
Does it involve
people
sex?
Yes.
I don't know how I guess that.
and sometimes people leave behind a token of the event on the grave. As
who's getting the dirty condoms today?
Whose job is that to clean those up?
Yeah, who's going to get the dirty condoms today? I don't know if that's what you're implying or not.
And that sucks. That's the thing. And I would consider that. Maybe don't do that. A friend of mine did a tour recently. She actually made a video podcast of her own about it. Like, apparently one of her tour guests like just kept insistingly asking over and over, like, hey, where can we go to a cemetery? Because me and my girl got to fuck in a cemetery tonight. And she's like, not only is that highly illegal, that is extremely disrespectful.
Right.
And then the guest decided to call her a bitch and leave the tour. And it's just like, no, I would not recommend disrespecting the dead.
Yeah.
I mean, some people think that's a form of like respect or recognition. I wouldn't do it, but I would also say the cemeteries out here, one of my things I think is fascinating about them, like, you can't bury, well, I can tell you all a funny story in a second, but generally you don't bury bodies in the ground around here because it's swamp. When floods come through town, the water might suck bodies out of the ground. It's not a good look. So bodies are usually buried above ground in crypts. And actually there's a specific type of crypt that's often used. I don't know if y'all know much about this, but when people are buried in the crypt, they're left in there for 1 year. And because it's above ground and it's marble it gets cooks the body. It makes it decay extremely fast compared to being buried, so that 1 year later they open the crypt back up and there's just a skeleton left, and they shove the skeleton back into the crypt into a hole at the end. And that hole drops into a pit at the bottom, and that's full of a bunch of other people's bones. Like, so that's to save space in a town where we can't keep just building up cemeteries over and over, and we can't bury bodies in the ground because, again, swampland. So, so that's what.
I was gonna say,
that's real?
Yeah, no, it's real. So a couple years ago.
So they reuse the crypts then?
Well, you have to. And actually, you know, a couple years ago, I'm going to say my youngest daughter, who's 19, she might have been 13, 14 at the time. We were walking. I actually think it was Metairie Cemetery, and we came across a family vault and a family tomb. And so you guys at home or wherever you are, you can't see the size of this room, but for Misty, it was maybe the size of half of this room, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet or something like that. But on the front of it, there's a plaque with like 30 names.
Okay.
And
yeah. No,
my daughter was like, Dad, how did all these people fit inside this tomb? And I explained that to her, and she said, did the same thing you did. No way. I was like, no, it's true. Like, for real.
Okay.
Like, and there's that analogy of like the family like all being together again in the end. You know, like
it's like the shoe fits for all. It may fit for Grandpa, and it's gonna fit for you too.
Well, plus, you know, Grandma's dying next year. You gotta make room for her. Yeah.
Scoot over.
Exactly. Y'all thought it was horrifying getting stuck with the in-laws at Thanksgiving?
Yeah.
I don't have any.
Get buried with them forever. Imagine your rib cage being just tangled up with somebody in the family you just hated.
Hell no.
Like that dick.
Now look who you got paired with. Who's your partner?
Exactly.
Oh, can I tell y'all a funny story, actually? There's actually, so like I said, you're not supposed to bury bodies in the ground in New Orleans for that reason. They learned that relatively quickly back in the day. But there is this one graveyard in New Orleans called the Holt Cemetery. And locally, people call it the poor man's graveyard because this is, like, as far as I'm aware, like pretty much the last graveyard in town where bodies are buried in the ground. And it's called the poor man's graveyard because it's for the folks, the people of New Orleans who have been too impoverished and disenfranchised to be able to afford the standard above ground crypt burial.
Now, is this the one that's out near Delgado? The Potter's Field near Delgado? Or?
I don't know if it's the one near Delgado, but I'm bringing it up because there's this speaking of Marilyn Manson in the 90s, yeah, this is a funny story. This is apparently allegedly a true story, and I wouldn't be shocked at all whatsoever. So back in the 90s, when the band was called Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids, they had recorded a couple albums in Florida. They got so notorious really quickly that they caught the attention of Trent Reznor, the leader of Nine Inch Nails. And Reznor invited Marilyn Manson to come out to New Orleans to record their next album in his record studio that was on Magazine Street. It was called Nothing Records, which is where they recorded their next album, Antichrist Superstar. And Antichrist Superstar was, of course, Manson's first platinum album, managed to make Marilyn Manson a household name, for better or worse. But while the band's in New Orleans recording Antichrist Superstar, they decided to go visit Holt Cemetery. Because the graveyard, they bury bodies in the ground, it's not uncommon for after heavy rains and heavy flooding for human bones to work their way to the surface. So it's a notorious graveyard. It's notorious for grave robbing, and it's considered extremely haunted, which may be what inspired them to break into the graveyard one night. And they allegedly found a busted up grave. They broke into the tomb. They stole human bones from the grave. They took the bones back to the recording studio, ground them into powder, and allegedly smoked the stolen human bones in meth pipes. And Marilyn Manson later wrote that was one of the worst trips of his life. But now we know why he's like that.
Yeah. I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's one of those stories. I wouldn't doubt it if it was true. So.
I know for a fact that Marilyn Manson was doing a lot of crazy things in this city. And I mean, he might be a cautionary tale of like, look what he decided to mess around with in New Orleans, and look how it worked out for him. But I was going to say, that apparently it's not an original idea for Marilyn Manson either. Shockingly,
no way.
It's not an original idea for Manson. Danzig and the Misfits allegedly did something similar,
right?
A few years earlier than that. But
was that a book?
I know a book fell down. It must be a ghost.
It's a ghost.
And then we got Tupac. I think the rumor was they smoked his ashes too. Tupac Shakur, all his buddies got together and smoked his. I don't know if that's true.
Out in New Orleans?
No, not New Orleans.
I was going to say. Oh, okay.
That's the only cool story I had.
That could be a sign of respect, you know? I mean, some people want you to eat their flesh and drink their blood, you know? Other people smoke their ashes.
Snort their ashes.
Leave my dead body alone. But when it comes to the cemeteries, Christian, like what if I just moved to New Orleans and I'm really trying to get a good vibe for the city and try to understand the city through its cemeteries. I guess we can leave St. Louis #1 out of it just simply because everybody goes there.
It's the mainstream
way. But what are some of these other cemeteries that you think everybody should visit at least once if they're going to live here?
I would say definitely Metairie Cemetery it's massive. It's expansive. Yeah. One time I also accidentally got locked in there one night, and me and my buddies were walking around, and it's just like it just almost feels like a labyrinth at points because it's such a huge cemetery. And then this guy walked up out of the shadows, and he was clearly on something. And I don't know if we were more freaked out by him or he was more freaked out by us, but it was just like, it was just like the kind of thing, like this is such a massive sprawling cemetery and so much amazing, like beautifully designed tombstones and crypts.
Right.
So I would recommend that place for sure. And then, I wouldn't discount St. Louis Cemetery #1 either. Of course. One of my favorite ones that used to be a burial ground was called St. Anthony's Garden, which is right behind St. Louis Cathedral. A lot of people don't know that was originally the graveyard for the cathedral until they realized it wasn't the best look for the Catholic faith when floodwaters come through town, washing bodies out of the ground and stuff. They reconstructed it as St. Anthony's Garden. I believe, I think there's actually still one of the former priests of the cathedral buried there. Yeah, that's an interesting place to hang out because it's considered to be extremely haunted. Also, it was the most popular place for duels to be held in the French Quarter back when dueling was very popular.
So, talking about cemeteries, I heard an interesting story that the Superdome is actually built on top. What was it, the Gerard? I think it might have been called Gerard Street or something like that. And I could be totally wrong about that. But supposedly that's why the Saints are such a horrible football team. Because they are.
Oof, I got to go.
No, I mean,
you're not dragging me
but
to
that was the, no, I hate football. But so I guess I hate the Saints too. So
yeah, me too. But I wouldn't speak against the Saints in New Orleans. It's a whole other thing.
It is. It's their own, let me tell you.
Go Saints. But no, seriously, there was, that was part of the legend was and I don't know that this is factual because I'm not a huge football fan, but apparently when the Saints came into the league, or at least when they started playing at the Superdome, there were like all these bad things that started happening to the team, or they had losing records and all this stuff. And from what I understand, the Superdome itself is actually supposed to be fairly haunted, and they think that it has a lot to do with that cemetery that used to be there. Because New Orleans has a bad habit of just building shit on top of cemeteries. Like,
yeah, actually, so yes, from what I understand, it's mostly the parking lot was built on top of a burial ground there. I also, on my tours, sometimes point out, because people, unfortunately, I've got to, I even sometimes make it a little PSA on the tour, because over the last 4.5, almost 5 years, I've been doing this job for Ghost City Tours. I've gotten burnt out on even like well-intentioned, good-hearted tourists asking me what happened to me during Hurricane Katrina out here, what happened to my family during Katrina. And I decided sometimes I'll give a little brief example about how horrifying Katrina was for people by talking about what happened in the Superdome during Katrina. And it's considered the Superdome might be haunted these days because of that, not just because it's literally built on top of a burial ground. But also the first precinct, I think the police station in the French Quarter is also built on top of a burial ground. The police station in the French Quarter is. There's a lot of burial grounds that were built on top of because, well, I guess, the Native Americans were like, hey, this is an ancestral burial ground territory. This is not a place to build your city. And then the Europeans were like, what do they know?
Right, yeah.
And, well, we've only been learning the hard way since.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, everywhere it seems like, Savannah is very similar in that regard. It's hard to go anywhere in the historic district without somebody claiming that there's dead bodies buried right where you're standing. But in Savannah,
they're not wrong. Probably not wrong.
Yeah, and I was gonna say in Savannah and New Orleans, I don't think they're necessarily wrong though. I mean, I found an old map. I mean, this was like an old map. I think it was 1850s or something, and it was laying out the cemeteries at the time in the French Quarter. And it was just amazing. Like there was even, at the time we were doing a story on Block and Norma Wallace. I think it was her name, Norma Wallace, Madam of, in how they have the Block house there. E.J. Block, the photographer. You ever see the red light district?
The red light district.
What was that?
Storyville.
Yeah, he was the photographer who took a lot of those Storyville portraits of those girls. Anyway, so we were looking at that house, and it turns out even that house was built on top of a graveyard. And then there's another one that's like just a block off Bourbon. I forget what cross street it is. I think it's on maybe Burgundy. There's a huge graveyard there too. Like it was just like they're everywhere. People digging pools.
One of my favorite stories on the Bad Bitches in New Orleans tour. It's usually featured. I'm not going to spoil too much of the story, right? But there is, of course, the legend of the House of the Rising Sun, which you might have heard the song. If you walk in the French Quarter, you will hear the song. Nice. Yeah, like some people believe it refers to a brothel. Some people believe it was a women's prison. Some believe it was a gambling den. Might have been a mix of all that, But there's a building in the French Quarter. It's a hotel now, but it used to be a brothel, one of the more popular ones in the city. And I always point out, 17, 1800s New Orleans, a lot of sex workers were not treated very kindly. A lot of them, if they weren't like dying from like diseases of the time, like STDs, like syphilis, they might have been dying because of the Johns who were known to violently beat these women, rob them, mug them, sometimes brutally murder them. But that was not one of those brothels, because in that place, they were the madam in control of the brothel was making sure the women knew that no abuse was going to fly. And well, long story short, during renovations of the hotel, a bunch of bodies were found buried in the courtyard, and they were all clearly Johns who had screwed something up.
Yeah.
That a girl.
So,
screwed something
For the last time. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
You
girl.
screwed something for the last time. Well, there's also the stories. Are you familiar with the stories of Smokey Row?
Not terribly familiarly. I will say that I know a good bit about a lot of things out here. If it's something on my tour, I know way too much about it. If it's something just off the tour, I'm familiar with it. I know a good bit about Smokey Row.
Yeah, the stories off of Smokey Row were very similar, where it was the women that were the aggressors. Like they were known to, and of course this is all history.
Oh, yeah.
Told through books or whatever. But essentially, what they would do is lure men in, beat the shit out of them, kill them. And at that time, Smokey Row is kind of like on the outskirts of the city, and they just take their bodies up to what is like the Armstrong Park area, or a little bit further than that, which was swamp, and just dump them for the alligator. And then, so it definitely went. The beatings went both ways.
Yeah, I will say, like, because like I always, and that's a still thing to this day. Do not piss off local women in New Orleans, because it's like, this was a very lawless land, and it was basically it said that that New Orleans was practically founded by French prisoners, pirates, and sex workers, and explains a lot of our history in the city we are today. But because of that, a lot of New Orleans culture was built by badass women. Like, honestly, women in 1800s New Orleans and 1900s, well, throughout New Orleans history, women have been actually a very big part of the city's cultural development, more so than many other places. Like, we were actually, under Napoleonic law.
Mm-hmm.
Even after we became American, we were still going by Napoleonic laws, which were way more forward thinking than American laws.
Right.
Like, women were allowed to own property under Napoleonic law in the 1700s. And under American law, women weren't allowed to have a credit card in their own name until the 1970s. So, so it's just like gives an idea of like how further advanced like French culture was when it came to treating women a little bit more. And even then, in the 1800s, of course, there was not equality, right, but a lot of women even things out one way or another. You could talk about Marie Laveau. You could talk about Josie Arlington. You could talk about Bricktop, another one of the celebrity names on the Bad Bitches tour. Right. I guess what my point with that was, like on Smoky Row, for example, it was called Smoky Row because of the women's complexion. Mm-hmm. Darker women were working Smoky Row, and of course it is that was a fetishization for a lot of folks. Yep. So people would go, they would be like, oh, here's all these brothels, but then there's these for the people who want to go specifically seek out that
look at it as more like an exotic pleasure. Yeah. In a sense.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, would have been considered exotic because ignorance of the 1800s. Mm-hmm. But one of the women there, she wouldn't put up with any bullshit. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she became notorious because multiple times she, if a dude had pissed her off, she would chase after him holding one of those old gas lamps, the kerosene lamps that has a bottle of kerosene at the bottom and then like a wick and a little thing. Yeah. You turn it to light and all that. And she would chase after him and throw it at him and smash it on him, which is like getting hit with a Molotov cocktail. Right. And it's like, you would, this is very much a, fuck around, find out kind of city. So
actually, funny enough,
that's why I like it.
Fuck around and find out. Did you see that video? I'm told kind of off topic. Did you see that fuck around and find out video that's going around social right now? It's the guy driving across the causeway. Mm-mm. And he like flipped that truck. So James over here, he saw it. Like the thing's like fuck around and find out. It's this heavy guy driving his truck or a car, and a truck started to come into his lane a little bit, and he purposely jerked the wheel to fucking roll this guy's truck on the causeway. And I'm like, that's New Orleans right there. Like, wasn't
that the one the guy was eating a sandwich, recording himself, and he just and the guy tries to cut in front of him. He's like, no, and he just keeps eating the sandwich, and the video just shows the truck just flipping, and the guy just didn't skip a beat. He didn't even stop eating his sandwich. He was just like,
and to me, like that's New Orleans in a nutshell.
For better or worse.
Yeah, with some more booze going on. But I was just like, fuck around and find out. No, you're right. That is definitely a New Orleans attitude. I don't know if you guys have exclusivity rights on that, but it's definitely a big theme here in town. Well, why would anybody? So all this stuff we're talking about, I know we're not doing it intentionally, and I know that we don't mean it, but we're kind of painting New Orleans in a not so great light here. So why? No, we can't. But no, give me a minute here.
Okay,
it's good and bad.
I'm bringing it back around.
Okay, I'll pump the brakes.
So for anybody who's listening to this podcast who is thinking like, hey, maybe I want to move to New Orleans, and now they're thinking like, oh fuck, like
fuck around and find out.
I don't know that I want to move there. There's actually a lot of
just get along with people.
Yeah, just get along with people. So why would somebody want to move to a city like New Orleans?
Because of everything that we came up with to overpower how nasty things can be here sometimes. There's a reason, like people. One of the things that honestly just kind of for anybody who's been here long enough, like there's a lot of gatekeeping. Like if you're from New Orleans or if you're local or not. Some people insist if you weren't born here, you're not local, and like. I've had people tell me, because like I said like earlier, I mentioned my family came down in the 1700s and 1750s on my dad's side, Cajun, Creole, throughout for 3 centuries. And I've had people tell me that I'm not from New Orleans because I didn't know the burger stand that their daddy ran for decades. I'm like, that's dumb as hell. Yeah. But there's some people say that if you survive a hurricane in New Orleans, you're local, you're bona fide, a New Orleanian now. Honestly, if you just are here, and you don't get, you don't piss people off too much, right, and get yourself ran out by being an asshole. If you're an asshole, maybe don't come. Yeah. But if you're cool,
come on down.
If you're an asshole, come along and see what happens, and give us some money, buy some drinks,
and go home.
But honestly, the reason we stick out through the hurricanes, people were like, why do people live there? Why don't you just move? If there's going to be a hurricane, just go somewhere else. It's like, because this is our home. This is our culture. There's no city like this one. There's a reason that we keep putting it back together. Every time a hurricane destroys the city, we rebuild it for a reason, because you're not going to find this anywhere else. You're not going to find the jazz, the food. You're not going to find the sense of familiarity. Like you out here, you get along with people, you realize this whole city is like a distant family. We all know each other to a degree, there's a sense of camaraderie. There's a sense of like, one of the common phrases out here is, hey, how's your mom and them? Like, just like not even necessarily literally asking about your mom, but just like, how are you and your people? Yeah. How are you and your family? We care about each other.
I noticed that when I was living down near the French Quarter. Like I said, I used to live on Marigny Street, and for such a big city, it was very interesting. And for me, it was a little unnerving because I am not a people person. Like, you just get to know everybody. Like, and for a city of New Orleans, I mean, there's a couple 100,000 people who live in New Orleans proper, right? Like, all the areas. I would walk down to the French Quarter and I would be waving to at least a dozen people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know all these people. And it was bizarre because, aside from the tourists, like it's almost like, whether I wanted to or not, I was becoming a part of New Orleans. Yeah. And like,
it pulls you in.
Yeah. And you start to feel like you belong there in a sense. But I'm not, I'm definitely not a local.
Yeah.
I'm from
You're not
fucking Pennsylvania.
Orleanian.
Yeah. It is bizarre. And I do think, Christian, you have a point. If you have the right attitude and you look at New Orleans the right way, I think that it is a very welcoming city. Probably one of the more welcoming cities that I've ever visited, because most cities, and I'm not going to name any, Austin, most of the people that I met there, they're dicks.
Yeah.
And
snub your nose if you're not one of them, and they do their thing.
I didn't have a big enough beard and flannel, so I wasn't welcome. But anyways, so no, I mean, but seriously though, I think that, if you are looking to move to New Orleans, or maybe you've lived here for a little while, but you're still hesitant to get out of your comfort zone. Maybe you bought a house in Midtown or the Garden District and you're still kind of leery about, checking out these other areas in New Orleans because all the news stories. First of all, news stories are all horrible. You're
not going to see positive murder stories.
They're not going to, so don't let that frighten you. But you do have to get out. You do have to get to know the different parts of your city. If you've lived here for a year and you've never been to the Garden District, you have no idea what you're missing out on.
Yeah.
People from New Orleans, people who stick around and have a great time here, it's because we know to get along. And even if there's like, if you have problems and grudges with people, now, full disclosure, I got my own, like, people out there, I do know a lot of people. On a single tour, I might say hey to 20, 30 people on my tour route, and people are like, oh, everybody out here. I'm like, yeah, I know too many people out here, because there's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of people out there that I just pretend aren't there. They're ghosts walking among us already. To me, as far as I'm concerned, they're dead to me kind of people. But those are usually also like people who just don't get the whole get along and don't cause trouble kind of vibe. And I always say, you're talking about people who look snooty at you because you're not wearing flannel and not, there is a problem where there's a lot of folks like that are moving to New Orleans and kind of creating an enclave in our own cities and in our own city. And like, you get that. I'll just say, if you're going to come to New Orleans and try to buy a house here, right next to a jazz club, and then you're going to call the cops at 9 p.m. because there's jazz music next door and you need to get your beauty sleep. That's not the city to be. You shouldn't have tried that. Don't do that.
Those people
you're kind of killing the
those people are the biggest assholes. I mean, we deal with it in Savannah, where you know, we have always done tours in the historic district of Savannah, and some of those tours, you know, here in New Orleans, you guys have that weird thing where all the tours have to be off the street by 10 p.m. In Savannah, we don't have that. Like, we could do tours at 2 a.m. if we want. And I mean, we wouldn't, but even 11:30, we'd have people, you know, 2 or 3 blocks off the main historic, you know, or the main street. You know, you got Bay Street, 3 or 4 blocks off that. They'd be calling the fucking police on us at 10 o'clock at night. There's a tour group outside my house. I didn't move here so I could have people outside my house. Are you fucking,
Wrong
what
house.
kind of fucking idiot are you?
Yeah.
Like, you moved to one of the biggest tourist destinations in America, and you're gonna bitch about tourists or the jazz club or
Lullery Mansion. For a couple years ago, we had this incident where this woman moved into like 2 or 3 doors down from the Lullery Mansion, and she was livid that there was tourists outside by the, you know, sometimes by the hundreds every night. And she would go out with a bullhorn and yell obscene things at tour guides and put on a siren and everything. And she even called the cops one time, and they went after her. Because she is the one harassing and disrupting a natural environment. That's the community. If you're going to live in the French Quarter, expect tourists, expect parades, expect tour guides, expect, you know, what this city already has been for forever.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I'm totally on that lady's side. Like, I would despise having people outside my house, but I would never buy a fucking home 3 doors down from the Lullery Mansion for that exact reason.
Exactly.
Like, like I don't like. You know, where I lived, like I said, on Marigny Street at the intersection of Marigny and Decatur. It was an old warehouse that they converted into condos or townhouses or whatever you want to call them. And we had, at first they were great, you know, floor to ceiling windows on 2/3 of the you know, your space. Beautiful. But yeah, the people walking by 2, 3 in the morning, like, I heard so many
things,
like even just people banging in the parking lot. Like, and that's why I left. I wasn't calling the police on people. I was just like, well, I gotta go. It's
not to see you. I mean, hell, I'm not gonna say where exactly I live, but I live on like relatively trafficked street out here that's known to have parades sometimes.
So we know where we could
stuff
go
like that.
For Mardi Gras parade.
Yeah, you can go.
Sorry,
I said, so now I know where to go to hang out for the Mardi Gras parade.
Right, yeah. I don't have a balcony view, but I got a pretty good view. I got a good like little spot for like Jazz Fest, Voodoo Fest, the French Quarter Fest, all that. I'm like right in there. But you know, every now and then there's a venue near me that will have a little parade and stuff, like, you know, wedding parties, what have you, birthdays and stuff. And they'll do a little second line in the neighborhood and area right that. And I was just the other day, I remembered like I was waking up at like, you know, noon, 1 p.m., something like that, because, you know, night owl schedule. And I'm getting up, I'm just brushing my teeth, and like there's a massive jazz explosion happening literally right outside the bathroom window, and it's just loud as hell, and I'm just brushing my teeth. It's just like, you know, it's just like not even registering to me. And then it dawns on me, there's a freaking jazz parade just exploding outside my window, and I'm just brushing my teeth to it, and like, oh, this happens like every other day, and this is not normal to anyone else, but I'm just out here just going about, you know, my, you know, washing my face, listening to just like this celebration outside. You know, this is gonna sound like it's off topic, but it's really not. So I'm sure you guys all have heard the idea of like we're living in a simulation, right? Like, you know, everybody, like I know Elon Musk got a lot of press because they asked him, you know, hey, are we living in a simulation? He gave this answer where he was like, we might be. I don't know. We might be. And he gave his whatever reasons why we're living in a simulation. To me, the biggest thing that would suggest that we're living in a simulation is actually New Orleans. like it's almost like New Orleans is a constant live performance, and you guys are all just actors playing your part. Like, you know, like you're just describing, and that's what brought it into my head was like the parades that just randomly pop up, and like it's almost like New Orleans is reality TV. Like it's like it's scripted. The worst of it. Sometimes.
Yeah, it's like scripted, but it's unscripted. If that makes any sense, like.
I think New Orleans had like the best selling Girls Gone Wild videos back in the day.
I don't know.
Like,
what are you talking about, Girls Gone Wild? I don't know of such a thing.
That was a thing in the 90s, VHS
That's
tapes.
not one of those pornographical things, is it?
No.
I was like 5 when that was a thing. So I just know, like, hey, I just know that like I heard like that was like one of the top selling ones because Mardi Gras, like people want to see the spectacle of New Orleans. Of course, I will, disclaimer, sorry guys and whoever else that like, Girls Gone Wild culture ain't as big as it used to be in New Orleans because now everybody has an HD camera in their pocket, and a lot of people don't want to end up on Facebook and YouTube, going too wild out here. So it's calmed down, and people are a little bit more big on consent these days. Yeah, thankfully,
plus they have their OnlyFans pages now,
so they need to get money.
They need exclusivity. Yes. Like I'm actually thinking about creating an OnlyFans
for feet.
No, just for me. I'm going to start getting in shape.
And then just be on it, like subscribe for yourself?
No, I mean, imagine this shit body not being shit. Like, you'd pay to see that, probably.
I mean, it's a developing industry.
Exactly. You never know.
And monetize it. Got to survive capitalism. Make what you can.
No, I'm all about
there. I think that now that the reality of me trying to make it on OnlyFans is really set in, I think we need to get to work here. As go to my girlfriend Stephanie. I'm like, hey, honey, I know I've been doing this OnlyFans, and you were very against it, but like I made $4 last month.
Yes.
Actually, sort of on a tangent, because like I'm also like trying to develop a like YouTube, TikTok kind of blurb situation, just to like get people like engaged with not only local history. I just do spooky, weird history stuff in general, but also trying to get encourage people to see little tidbits and bits about New Orleans history and why they should come check it out. But you were making that point of like when you mentioned what we do in the shadows earlier, and me and my girlfriend actually. She works at the Museum of Death now, and when I met her, was one of the bartenders at the Vampire Speakeasy, which, if you're cool, ask around, you might find out about that.
I'm not
pretty cool
I'm
little
not really
spot,
that cool.
I am.
Not y'all. I'm talking to the audience out there.
Well, Mistie's kind of cool. She might be able to get in. They would look at me and they'd be like, narc.
I make this joke that, if you work in the French Quarter, if you work in New Orleans long enough, you'll end up becoming either a bartender or a spooky tour guide. And me and my girlfriend got both bases covered on that. But we were talking about, because we in our own personal lives have seen so many weird, crazy. It's like, if Tim Burton and Rob Zombie directed Seinfeld, that's kind of what our lives are like. She's a bartender at the Spooky Vampire Speakeasy on Bourbon Street, which it's not really a Bourbon Street kind of place. It's a speakeasy. It's hidden from the public, so it's its own dynamic. And then I'm a spooky true crime horror tour guide in the streets, and between our two different jobs, and now she's been working at Museum of Death for a while. So between our jobs, we kind of got a whole corner on the spooky market out here, and we've seen enough stuff. And just go after work, go down to Lower Decatur Street, go to where all of us local creature features hang out at the end of the night and get most of our personal stories from. There's literally been so many scenes that should be like a sitcom. We were thinking we should do a New Orleans sitcom of like, one of the characters has to be a spooky tour guide in the French Quarter. One of them has to be a bartender in the French Quarter. Like those are archetypal characters, archetypes that have to be represented, because this is like a reality show that you couldn't script if you tried.
Those are the best.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that in regards to what we do in the shadows, because there was a couple times when I was watching that with Stephanie, and I was like, we need to parody this. We need to parody the parody, like somehow, because it's stupid humor, really. I mean, there's nothing about what we do in the shadows where you're like, man, that is just brilliant writing. Like that's not like they're not going to win an Oscar, but it was so just lighthearted. Making fun of themselves, just having fun, I guess. I don't know how to word it, but I did think that would be something that you could do in a fun nature, something along those lines.
Honestly, there's been plenty of times I'm watching What We Do in the Shadows, or me and my girlfriend are watching it, and I'm just like, this is just our life, like on a Saturday night. I hang out with people in the vampire community, and the goth scene, and all these certain circles, and it's just like, there's a lot of relatability with that show sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
for better and worse.
Well, we've been going here for a while, Christian, and I don't want to. I don't think that we're so good at this yet that we're going to keep people's attention for 2 hours. I think we're at 1 hour and 45 minutes now. So,
my tours are about 1 hour and 45 minutes, and that's you gotta hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. Yeah. That's about how long I can keep people's attention.
Well. I really do appreciate you joining us. And actually, when I started this company, I got the go to the historical societies, and I got to go out and talk to people and dive into old books. And like, I love that side of the business. But over the last 5, 6, 7 years, I've got to do very little of that because I'm always, you know, I'm essentially 90% of the marketing for 26 markets right now, on top of running the company, on top of the fact this is only one of 5 companies that I own, on top of the fact that I have one of the largest private collections of reptiles in the United States that I'm also responsible for. Like, just all this crazy shit. But anyways, my point is, as we're sitting here talking about this, like the Oswald stuff and the Zulus, and like I just feel like this thing bubbling up inside of me where it's like, man, I want to like get back into that and just learn about the history and explore all these things. And
Yeah, I had an idea. If you ever want to, like, if you ever get people that are interested in it, people with longer than average attention span these days, you know, I've toyed with the idea of having like the exclusive deluxe spooky tour that's like 3 hours long, 20-minute bar break in the middle, maybe a couple bar breaks, but it's like just a super tour.
Yeah.
Because I really think like an hour and a half to 2 hours. It barely scratches the surface.
I think once you get those right people that are really into it, once they're hook, line, and sinkered into the way you communicate and feeling what's going on, an hour and a half went by so fast. I was like, shit, it's over. Yeah. So people could be hooked longer if they're into that kind of thing.
They've tried to bribe me. I'll give you $100 for another hour. And I'm like, I got to go home. But, you know,
I'd be like, make it to 200.
Sweeten the pot a little more, add drinks and dinner, and I'm in.
All right, so Christian, we're going to wrap things up here.
Yes.
But it's been a pleasure, talking with you, hanging out, and after 5 years of working for the company, I'm glad that we finally actually had a chance to do something other than simply exchange some Slack messages.
Likewise.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any last words of advice you have for anybody who lives in New Orleans, who wants to learn more about New Orleans, but they just don't have the right mindset yet?
Or where to begin?
What would you tell these people?
I would say, pretty much no matter who they are, I know that when you live in this city, even if you're not part of like the spooky scene, if you're not part of whatever, you've seen things that have piqued your interest. You've seen little threads of what hides beyond the veil. Go pull on those threads and go find out a little bit more. And as soon as you find out a little bit more, you're going to want to know a lot more. Like, it's going to just be like, you're going to get pulled in. There's going to be something fascinating. When you learn about that, it's going to lead you to something else fascinating. This whole city is just a mix of fascinating things like piling on top of each other. It's a cascade that, once you get into it, you can't really get out of it. You're going to want to explore more and more. And it's not just the French Quarter. It's not the Bywater Marigny, just that area. There's, and then you can even just this whole city is full of so many little hidden details. Go find one of those, you can find like a book, 100 interesting things to find in New Orleans, one of those little scavenger things, and you'll never be bored. Like once a week, twice a week, go on an adventure. The city, I've been here most of my life. I know this place so professionally. It's my job to know all the nitty gritty little spooky things out there, hidden things, and I'm learning new things all the time. There's so many hidden gems that I still find out all the time because it never ends. Go explore.
That's actually excellent advice.
It is.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere. Yep. Go find one of those threads.
Yes, and start pulling.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you want to learn more about New Orleans from Christian, you can always find him on our ghost tours in New Orleans. I think you primarily do. Is it just the bad bitches and killers and thrillers, or?
No, I do the killers and thrillers mostly. That's like the one that I do the most, and it's like. I feel like the crown jewel,
right.
But also Bad Bitches is one of my favorites because it's so many good for her stories. Right. It's a lot of fun. And I do the haunted pub crawl, which is, booze and ghosts and pirates and sex workers, all that stuff mixed together. It's a fun time. So there's a variety of spooky stuff to check out.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to join us, Christian.
Yes, thank you.
And until next time.
Yes. Thank you so much for being on.
It's a pleasure, y'all. Have a good one.
Too.
All right. Yep.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the rest of your question. Thanks.
New Orleans. The city that care forgot. Where you'll find spirits of a more ghostly variety. Walk with us, or crawl if you must. as we visit some of the most haunted watering holes in the Crescent City. And raise a glass
To those we have lost, and to those that linger behind.
Ghost City Tours Haunted Pub Crawl.
Book your tickets now at ghostcitytours.com.
All right. Well, that was a pretty good interview.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, a lot of fun. It's always fun talking to people about their hometown hauntings and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, and local legends and see
Indeed.
what each city brings.
Right. So that brings us to photo of the day. So as you guys might know, every week we go over photographs that people send us. Usually these are people who join us on a tour.
But you don't have to be on a tour to send photos if you capture something
Right.
just out and about in your local hometown.
Yeah, we'll take a look at your dirty kitchen and tell you that there's a ghost in there or not.
Yes.
Send anything in. But this week's photograph actually came from
Me.
Mistie.
Yes.
And tell us a little, give us a little background. What were you doing in New Orleans that night? Or don't we want to know?
I went on a pub crawl
Right.
that Ghost City Tours offers. And it was a great pub crawl. First time going there. Been in New Orleans many, many times, but went to places I've never been to and seen different things. So it was a great experience. And our
Right.
guide was amazing, Lauren. So
Well, that's why we're doing the whole hometown hauntings thing.
Yeah,
Like people are
to get
amazed,
you out.
like when you live there, just like you live here.
Yeah.
Like you go on a tour and you go to places that, like, I didn't even know this place existed.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and
That's
that's
like right there, touchable, and be like, oh shit.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. So where
Yes. And
was
I love
this?
history, so this was like right up my alley.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Well, looks almost like an alley. So where
does.
where were you?
We were by Jackson Square, and we stopped at one of our spots, and one of it was Muriel's,
Yep.
if I'm saying that correctly.
Muriel's.
And it was a restaurant, beautiful looking restaurant. But they went on to tell the story about how the owner owned it, and they have a table set for him to stop the shenanigans that were going on, like to appease him.
Right.
So that's what we're looking at in the corner was the table. So the window is outside, so you don't go in and disturb the patrons. There's a window, and you can look through, and obviously the table's set in the red rope. And so there's a lot of people out. It was really close to Halloween, like 2 days before Halloween, and it was crowded.
Right.
So we did, there's some pictures, and our tour guide was telling stuff. I took pictures, was like, and then went back when everybody started walking, because it was really interesting, the whole story behind it and the way she told the story.
Right.
So then took some more pictures, and I was like, oh, look. And so I'm a believer. I am. And so I thought when I was
Isn't
looking
that
through
one
the
of those
photos-
people like Justin Bieber?
I'm a huge Belieber fan. I
Oh.
love the Bieber.
Really?
Yes.
Ugh.
Yes. Great.
Justin Bieber, you suck.
The whole hair flip that he did was,
He's a degenerate.
that's okay. And he's, yeah.
He like peed in a mop bucket on video. one
Okay,
time.
well,
anyway,
people do shitty things.
yeah, all right, we're
He
getting
grew.
off topic. All right, so you're at Muriel's.
Yes, and so then I
And-
went back and was taking pictures through the window after like the crowd left and another tour from whatever went. And so went back and was taking pictures. Then I started looking through them after at the next stop while people were getting drinks. I was outside like just scanning through pictures. I thought, oh, that's really cool, and see what it is. But I figure if you can't take the heat, don't play the game. And so I figured I'm going to submit my photos and we'll see what you think. Factor crap and tear it apart if you want to.
All right.
Okay.
I do love tearing it apart.
There you go. So what I did notice in the photos, so I took them back to back and I have them timestamped, whatever, but like see above the person's head eating in the door.
Right.
So it's a old building, but yeah, so there's one. And then as you look through the photos, like it looks like it's moved
Right.
areas.
So this was the first, and you said this
Yes.
was the second, I think, right?
Yeah.
So this is the second one.
And now it's on the
there's-
floor.
There's your little green dot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a
And
green
then in this one,
dot. It's there.
there's still a green dot,
Green dot.
but it's in a different location.
Yes. Well, or it looks like it's okay. And then there's,
And this one's
Yes.
on the wall.
yes. Where the first one was above a patron's head, it looked like, then it's on the floor a little closer, and then it's on the floor again.
Right? Mm-hmm. There's another one,
Yes.
or the same one.
And then
And there it is next to,
a guy in an orange suit. Maybe he is the ghost. That's a badass outfit, though. I'll tell you what. I give him props for that.
if I was a ghost, I'd probably wear, I mean, is he wearing a top hat?
It looks like it. In an orange suit, like from Dumb and Dumber.
Maybe this is the ghost of like a flamboyant,
You
like
are in New
Abraham Lincoln.
Orleans.
Yeah. Like Abraham Lincoln came to New Orleans, which he did.
Did he?
Yeah, he came down. He came here numerous times
I
when he was
love
young.
the fashion out here. Like, I think it's amazing. Everybody's aesthetics. But yeah, so there we are.
All right, so let's go back to the dot. So we have this dot,
Yes.
which in this one it's in the middle of the floor.
Yes.
And then the next one, and you already know what I'm going to say, your camera moved.
Yes.
Therefore, the dot moved. And what a coincidence. It moved in the same direction. Now, I will say this, though. So, like, we go to the next one, and it's roughly in the same position again. Because see how in this one, like, you're more towards, your camera's pointed more towards the door?
Yeah.
In this one, your camera is more pointed towards the wall. And guess what? The dot's on the wall. And this one, you move back towards the middle of the room with your camera slightly.
Okay.
And then the dot's on the floor again. And then this one, I don't know what, I mean, this is obvious. You were obviously drunk at this point.
I probably was, because we left the bar, the absinthe bar, and then we left some other bar, and then we went there and I was having a good old time.
Oh, yeah.
But
well,
yes.
Yeah. So I think what happened here is you got drunk.
Shit.
And,
everybody knows. No, I did. I was. It was a good night.
I don't know that you got drunk. But I think what was happening here, so I think that green dot is some sort of reflection or a lens refraction or something going on with the lens of your camera. There's light hitting the lens of the camera, creating that pinprick of light on the lens of your camera, which of course is then part of the photograph.
Okay.
But the thing that, if I'm going to go back through these, the only thing that I'm like, and by the way, I'm not saying this is a ghost, because I'm sorry, I don't think it is. But the only thing that confuses me about this is I can't pinpoint the source of light that's causing that green dot reflection, lens aberration, whatever you want to call it. So I still don't think it's anything paranormal, because the bottom line is that dot does tend to follow the movements of your camera.
Okay.
I just don't know where the light source is coming from. That's all.
So do you notice that if people have pictures with phones compared to like real cameras, if that makes a difference?
Well, to be honest, most phones take just as good pictures as quote unquote real cameras. But I don't really notice much of a difference. I mean, because the reality is there's still light passing through glass. And when light hits that glass, whether it's on your phone or the end of your lens, it can cause funny things, to happen, light bouncing off at weird angles. And you'll notice that a lot of these are green.
That was my other question to ask.
And that's because of the coating that's on a lot of camera lenses. It's the coating that helps block out UV light and stuff like that. Actually, I think some of that's on the sensors now. So you could probably just ignore everything I just said, but I do know that it has something to do with the coating that they put on the lens, which is why these things tend to be green.
Okay.
But if I'm wrong, feel free to blast me in the comments. That's fine.
And then send us your photos so we can blast you.
Yeah. Blasting goes two ways.
Yes.
Blast you back.
Don't play the game if you don't like it.
Well, I mean, I have seen a couple interesting photographs from this specific location.
Okay.
As in, like, so that they have that table set up in the back for the ghost. And you're right. They put that there so that, like, if we give him his own table, he'll quit messing with the people eating dinner.
Yes.
And I actually saw a photograph a couple of years ago where it looked like a man was sitting at that table.
Yes.
But it obviously was not a real man because everybody at the tables nearby or the people walking nearby were completely, like, you couldn't see through them. But this guy sitting at the table was about half transparent. Like you could see the wall behind him.
Yeah.
And he wasn't moving. So it wasn't like he was moving so fast to cause like a blur.
Was he hit that table?
Yeah, he was sitting at that table.
So most people who are owners are high up and like whatever, and they have their own VIP table. Like they would obviously go to that table because they know that's theirs and nobody else is going to sit there.
Yeah, that's where I sit.
That's why it was like owners.
Yeah, where's my VIP table?
Exactly.
But so I do think that this is a good spot for people that are on a tour.
Oh yeah.
To stop and take a couple pictures and see what you get.
Yes.
But in this case, Misty, sorry.
Do I get a D or a C for? No, I get an E for trying effort. E for effort.
Yeah, we're gonna go with that. We're gonna give you an E for effort. No ghost.
I'm cool with it. Okay.
All
hey,
right.
I'm good. I just like to participate and to see what we see, and everybody through their own eyes, and they get excited when they take pictures. And on the tour, I could say people would take pictures and they would be talking amongst other people on the tour that you don't even know, but everybody was getting so into things that it was like, did you get anything? Did you get anything? So then drinking helps do that, and then you just start talking with everybody. But all the spots and everything you went to, places like you said, I've never been to. I didn't know there was like a I don't know where all the nuns are. We went to that area. That was really cool. And so just everything was, I would definitely suggest going on one of those.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
A lot of fun.
All right. So I almost said thanks for sending this in.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks for sending this in, Misty.
No problem.
And if you have any photographs you want us to take a look at, feel free to send them to us. We'll take a look at them. Bring your A game though, because we can be a little brutal.
When we say we, he means he.
Yeah, maybe. Or, if you don't want to send them to us, just put them on Instagram. You can tag us at Ghost City Tours, hashtag Ghost City Tours, and we'll see them that way too.
Completely anonymous.
Oh, it's not anonymous on Instagram.
Well, no. Oh, yeah. But like, if you were to send them or send us email or reach out to us, we could do it anonymously. So that way.
Yeah, if you want to be anonymous, send it to us on email, because if you post on Instagram, like, we're going to know that was Pink Bunny 69 on Instagram. Yeah. So,
okay.
All right. Thank you. That was it for this week. We'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Hometown Hauntings is brought to you by Ghost City Tours, offering tours in over 20 of the most haunted cities across the United States. Book now at ghostcitytours.com and use promo code PCNOLA15 for 15% off. That's PCNOLA15.